Even so, web folks talk about content being above the fold or below the fold. This is, again, a newspaper term, and you can consider the fold kind of the bottom of the screen before any scrolling happens. And I think still not a ton of people, fewer people will scroll and read content below the fold. But again, I think this is subtly changing, and more people are scrolling down, increasingly so. So this is a very long, rambling way to say that we should put the most important content on the page front and center. If you really want someone to read something on a certain web page, you need to put it front and center. Otherwise, chances are they might not see it. I'll talk about this a little bit more. So that's just a really brief overview of reading on the web. I don't know about any of you, but I would be surprised if you read a ton of long-form content on a computer screen sitting at a desk. And we need to design our content accordingly. So how are we going to do that? I have some ideas. And what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about things in an interesting order. I'm going to talk about really small, granular ideas first, and we're going to get bigger in concept as we go along. All this can be considered part of writing for the web, even though it's about more than just sort of sentence construction. So we're going to start with typography, talk about some more conventions, talk a little bit more about writing, then we'll talk about higher level content strategy stuff, and then get into our first sort of research area in preparation for next week, talk about personas. So, typography. Here is a crash course on typography for the web. There are different typefaces out there, right? And this is a distinction many of us know. There are serif typefaces. Serifs are these little extra bits that are on a letter. And there are sans serif typefaces. Good distinction to know. Some popular serif typefaces for the web. These are web-safe fonts, Georgia and Times. Helvetica is not a web-safe font, and Tahoma is. So web-safe font is a font that comes preloaded on most computers and will then display. So most computers already have Tahoma installed, so you can use that. PCs generally don't have Helvetica installed. These are just some common examples. So in addition to web-safe fonts, you can get a little bit fancier with your typography by employing web fonts. I know that sounds similar, and it kind of is, but essentially with the web font software like Google Web Fonts or Typekit, you can sort of force people's browsers to display certain typefaces. So check out Google Fonts. You put in a little bit of JavaScript, and you have access to a ton of different typefaces that you can employ to have a certain look or feel to your site. Certainly don't overdo it. One or two typefaces is enough. Any more than that, things get distracting. But I wanted to make you aware of the wonderful world of web fonts via Google or Typekit or a number of different services. And if you're interested in seeing some good pairings of two typefaces, check out this site. It's called Just My Type, and it shows how you can employ different pairings and get different looks and feel. It's a nice site. Google Web Fonts is free, as you can imagine. Typekit has a free plan. It's now owned by Adobe, and it's also pretty reasonable if you want to pay for it. And there are some really high quality typefaces. Okay, so how should you make your typefaces? Definitely not too big, not too small. The important thing here is that your web pages be legible, right? There's no real right or wrong answer about using serif typefaces versus sans serif typefaces on the web. Both can be implemented well, both can be implemented poorly, but legibility is definitely key. So here is kind of a nice balance example, nice kind of big bold headings that are easy to scan. And the body copy is also pretty legible, maybe a bit on the small side for my preferences, but decent. Yeah, that's maybe a little bit better. 16 pixels is a good way to start, a good value to start at for your body copy. Take a look at your website. I bet many of you are at 12. It's kind of a standard. I find it to be a little bit difficult to read and scan. Try bumping things up to 16 and see how you feel. Grids. Grids are important. So grid systems are an important and long-standing tool to use in graphic design and layout. And there are many different ways you can employ grids on the web. Grids make pages easier to scan. They bring order to a page. They kind of make pages feel more calm. Here's a really simple example of how things not aligned to a grid feel a little bit weird. And aligning these things to a grid, again, very simple example, but brings some order and calmness to the page. If you want to see an amazing example of a grid system, check out the BBC's website. The BBC has an amazing document called the BBC Global Experience Language. And they have a set style guide for all of their web properties. And I think, honestly, the BBC larger website might be one of my favorite sites on the web. The typography is great. The information architecture that they've employed to deal with the huge, vast amount of content on their site is so amazing. And they have this amazing visual language that they employ consistently. So this is a very grid-based design. You can see all the rules they use to make the grid and use the grid. So there's a big PDF called the BBC GEL, or Global Experience Language. It's worth you browsing around for sure. And here's just an example. I'm certainly not suggesting that you have to go out and create a visual language today, but if you're going to be redesigning your site, coming up with a pattern library in a visual language like this can be an effective way to do some design and make sure pages stay consistent. So in grid systems, you choose column widths, and again, finding a happy medium is a nice strategy. So and this has everything to do with reading and making things legible and easy to scan. This column is a bit wide, and by the time a reader gets to the end of this column, reading a sentence, this gets a bit tiring. There's this sort of like a long way for eyes to go from the left to the right. And in this way, it's being too narrow, it's sort of tiring in a different way. It feels frantic reading and going down line by line. So finding something that is a happy medium makes, again, the page feel calmer, makes the page easier to scan. A totally rough guideline is for your lines to be 40 to 80 characters long. So this is something that you can do, and this has a lot to do with the size of your typeface and a lot of other things. But as a rough guideline, see if your web pages are employing columns about this length. I think this, I mentioned this site last week. I think this is a very appropriate column length, and here we have a pretty classic web page layout where we have a main content column on the left, a sidebar on the right, and this helps a page form some cohesiveness, and this template is used extensively throughout the site. If the sidebar was a little bit more narrow, maybe the content there would be difficult to see, maybe the main body column would be too wide. So this is a nice balance. I think perhaps the typeface could be a bit larger, but again, that's maybe a little bit of my bias. Another good balance, nice typography, is the Princeton Public Library. I mentioned this site last week as well. If you want to get nerdy with grids, check out this book called Ordering Disorder. It's by a guy who used to be the head of design for the New York Times website, and he took them through some great redesigns and employed some pretty awesome grids on that site. There's another book called, if you really want to get in deep to it, called Grid Systems for Graphic Design. That has nothing to do with the web. It's an old classic book by a Swiss typographer called Joseph Müller-Brockmann. But I think if you want to get into it, it's a great foundation. Do you think this would get you going? Okay, so grids and typefaces can certainly impact the rhythm on the page, and page rhythm impacts the how easy it is or how difficult it is to scan. So making it scannable is good. Let's look at some examples of good and bad page rhythm. This rhythm to me is all scrunched together, and it's a little bit difficult to get into rhythm trying to read this. It's a little bit busy and frantic. This to me is a bad rhythm. It's real clunky, especially the second heading, just sort of scanning. You're not quite sure if it's associated with the top content or the bottom content, and there's just not a real good flow to things. And this to me is a more appropriate rhythm where headings and content are lumped together, and it's easy to associate one with the other. It's easier to bounce from chunk to chunk. So take a look at your website and see what you think about the rhythm on it. Is it easy to scan? And are there kind of discrete chunks of content? Or are they just a bunch of sentences strung together with sort of jagged edges, which can make things difficult? Definitely take a look, click around, and see what you think. Okay, what about line height? Here we have a paragraph that is just a little bit sort of scrunched together. Here we have a line height that is too big, again, making things difficult to move from one line to the next. And here we have something a bit more reasonable, a bit more middle of the road. And here is some math, and I think really this is the most technical we'll get today. But one way to assess this, one kind of way to start thinking about your line height is the size of your body copy in pixels times 1.5 can be your line height. That's just a rough guideline for you to use. So again, take a look at that. So here's a little diversion. How do you assess what size your typeface is, or how do you assess what size your line height is? There's a great, and this might be a little bit technical, but I'm going to mention it anyway. There's a great tool for most modern browsers called Firebug, and it's a little extension that you can put on your browser, and you can use it to inspect different elements on your site. So it's something I use pretty much on a daily basis, and you can learn a lot about web pages and your web page if you install this little browser extension. Once you install the extension, you can sort of click on your body copy, right-click on your body copy or any other element, and choose Inspect Element, and then a little thing comes up that says, oh, this typeface is Helvetica, and the size is 16, and the line height for this paragraph is, whatever, 20. So if you want to dig into that, I highly encourage you to play around with Firebug, free extension for most browsers. Having a system of typography and applying that system consistently across pages definitely helps with page rhythm and scannability. So your H1s should be a certain size, your H2s should be a certain size, smaller, and on down. Again, this is sort of a conventions type thing, but applying things consistently, like making sure all of your links are the same color, definitely helps with readability and page rhythm too. All this can be a lot of work and seems like a lot of work, and it is, but luckily, if you are going to do a redesign or start sprucing up your pages, you only have to do this design work once, right? Once you figure it out, it's going to be applied to all sorts of pages on your site. And you do that through the wonderful world of page templates. I'm guessing that most of you, and you can chime in if I'm totally wrong, but I'm guessing that most of you employ some sort of content management system on your website. And if you do, these things are powered by page templates, and that's a good thing because you design the template once and you can employ it all over the place. Okay, let's talk about some more conventions for writing. And a bright pink color will keep us awake. So I mentioned links before. Links are important because they get people from one place on your site to the next. And just like we are concerned about writing our paragraphs and sentences well, we should be concerned about writing our links well. So the above URL and using that as a link is a horrible idea, right? This is not human. This is very hard to remember. It's very hard to write down, and it's long. So there is no excuse for having big, ugly URLs through really basic website voodoo. You can rewrite your websites, rewrite your URLs to them look good. If you want, I know that was a very vague description about how to do it, invoking voodoo, but if you want more about, but anyway, make sure your URLs are human and readable. They're much easier to, it's much easier to promote websites and web more like this, right? So here's another example of linking uncompassionately. Log in from off campus and then a link. Why not turn that into a button, right? So buttons can be very useful for links, and making them full of action words and good keywords is important for making good buttons. What about this one? Click here to access PsycInfo. This is a big no-no for linking compassionately. Why? Because it contains the words click here. So instead of click here, make it more active, something like this, search PsycInfo, or whatever you want people to search. Click here, if you have any instances of click here on your website, get rid of them today. It's a definite web usability no-no in that those words don't add any value, they don't add any context to the link. So make sure your links are meaningful. Here's another convention for writing. And here's one that I have clearly disobeyed on this slide on purpose. Using adequate contrast is super important for writing. If you have dark text on a dark background, it's just hard to read. Animation, pretty much very little room on a website for animation and clip art. Just go ahead and skip it. Oftentimes, plainness really can improve usability. Having a little cartoon with a shovel for your under construction website or whatever really doesn't add any value. It's just distracting and pretty much clutters up the page. If you actually, I don't think I've linked to this, but a great web page that went around a little while ago that talks about writing for the web is called This Is a Web Page. So if you just search online for This Is a Web Page, I bet it'll come up. And it's a great statement on writing for the web and sort of advocates for plainness on the web. Okay, here's another convention that we should obey. And again, here's my attempt at humor. Passive voice is not very effective for leading people to action. So I see stuff like this on the web all the time on library websites. A nice example of passive voice. Instead of doing a library card is required to check out items. We should write in the active voice. And here is just maybe a more friendly active voice example. So As you are scanning your web pages, be on the lookout for passive voice. It's very institutional, very unexciting and uninspiring, and change that to active voice stuff. Definitely feel free to talk directly to people on your website. So putting something like, what is your email address, is a great strategy. This makes it very clear what you're interested in that box. And also feel free to write in the first person as if you are someone trying to accomplish a certain task, aka, or an example, how do I reset my PIN? This is makes it very clear to understand sort of what's going on in these two cases, unlike my explanation right there. So I hope you got that. One thought per sentence. Writing things that are too complex, writing sentences that are too complicated can lose people if they are scanning around. And sentence fragments are totally okay. So some folks think that this means that you need to dumb down the writing on your website. I really don't see it that way at all. I think writing plainly doesn't mean you're dumbing things down. And anyway, aren't most newspapers written at like the 4th grade level or something like that? So keeping things simple is fine. And you really can spend a lot of time crafting simple sentences. So there is a lot of smarts, there are smarts that go into it. Okay, so those are some conventions based around writing. Let's talk more generally about writing on the web. Think of your website as a conversation between the library and a library user. And I guess I mean this in kind of two ways. I think you should have a conversational, friendly, fun tone. But also think of it as an exchange back and forth between the library and someone who is interested in solving a certain problem or completing a certain task on the site. And I think this goes along with using the first person and third person, actually, I don't know, is that the third person? I don't think so, but it's definitely the first person. Anyway, it goes along with addressing people and talking as if someone is trying to accomplish a task. So scan your site. Does it seem like a conversation? Is it giving people the same sort of service as they're getting at the reference desk? Does it have that same sort of feeling? You can think of your website as a kind of big compilation of frequently asked questions. Now, you're probably familiar with the classic FAQ format where there is a big question and then some content underneath that answers that question. I think that can be an effective way to sort of frame some pages. It doesn't mean that your homepage or entire site needs to be in an FAQ format. I think that could be problematic, probably would be problematic. But just conceptually, think of your website's content as needing to answer some frequently asked questions or help people accomplish frequently needed goals or tasks. Click around your site, assess the content, and see if its job, see if it is kind of answering frequently asked questions. So I showed this last week. I'll just show it again to reiterate. Removing words, listing things in an FAQ-ish format, addressing people through questions, having a conversational tone. All of that is sort of on example here. It's easy to scan. I think again the typeface could be a little bit bigger, but I guess would say that about most websites. Again, small typeface, big blocks of text, changing this to a more grab-and-go conversational format with chunks of text, FAQ-ish in nature. When we went to school, we were taught to write like this, but this is not how we want to write. We need to write with an inverted triangle, and we need to write the most important things first. We need to write like journalists with a very important piece of information first that summarizes the rest of the page. Then below that, list any sort of supporting or background information, and underneath that have any history or some kind of secondary information that only very few people need to know about or will be interested in. So lead strong, have any backup information, and any kind of historical information. And there's plenty online about writing like a journalist. You can look it up. So if you wanted a 3-step plan to improve your writing, I think removing elements from a page to calm a page down, removing words from that page to make your writing more efficient and easier to scan, and improving the tone, making things friendly and fun. May have mentioned this last week, but I'm going to mention it again because I totally love this book. Letting Go of the Words, Ginny Reddish. It's not a super short book, not a super long book. You can browse through it in a couple days, and it will definitely change the way you think about writing for the web, and give you some great examples of how to improve it. If you are super into this, revising prose also is a great way to get good at tuning up your sentences. Okay, I can pause for questions if anyone has anything to ask about writing for the web. I don't know if the chat is functioning right now, but I'd be happy to answer some questions about writing, or we can save all that for the end. Yeah, great, Julie. Julie mentions getting rid of click here type of directions. So, I totally understand the intention behind click here, and that it's meant to really inform people what to do and where to do it. I think there are more effective ways to do that. So here's just an example off the top of my head. A website could say, click here to subscribe, right? And the link could be click here, and then the words would be to subscribe. A slightly better way to do that, which I think is still informative and hand-holding in nature, would be just to make click here to subscribe, make all of that a link, right? I think that's one step above. Then I think even a better option than that, which I think maybe is still kind of hand-holding in nature and leads people to action, would be making the link that says subscribe now, and having that be the link. That's more active. I could understand if you would argue that that is sort of less hand-holding, but ideally, if all of the links on your web page, all the links on your website were consistent, it would be pretty apparent what is clickable and what is not, right? Your text will probably be black. Maybe your links are the classic blue. I don't care if they're the classic blue link. I don't even necessarily care if they're underlined. But if a website has links that are all the same color, I think that's a pretty good indication. And nothing else on the site is that same color, right? People even subconsciously clue in to that and will know what to click on. So yes, hand-holding, totally appropriate, making things easy. I'm all for it. I think there are ways to do that without using click here. Anything else? Okay, well, if you think of anything else, let me know. Okay, so why do we need to worry about the content process? I bet this might be apparent to a lot of folks, but if we want our websites to be full of good, useful content, we really need to think about it hard. amazing, well-written, relevant content does not just magically appear in a newspaper. It doesn't magically just appear in a magazine. It doesn't just magically appear on a website. It takes a lot of work to make good content. There's no way, no two ways about that. This is another reason why I spent a lot of time last week mentioning reducing the scope on a site as being a really great tactic. I want you all to be spending a lot of time crafting your content, both on a high level, like what content should we have on the site, and then making sure that content is well written and good. So we all have limited resources, and the smaller site you have, the more time you can spend crafting that content and making it good. There also are a lot of territorial issues around content on a website, whether it's a library website or otherwise. Most everyone wants a piece of the home page. There are other weird things that happen, like maybe one person has control over the entire website, and they're the only person that has control over the website. And I think that's a totally legitimate way to operate, as long as the person isn't a roadblock, right? And then there are people that want too much content on the website. Maybe they want something that's totally irrelevant. So there are a lot of touchy issues based around content. And taking the time to articulate a content strategy and having a plan for what's going to be on there can help ameliorate a lot of those issues. So what is content strategy? We can think of content strategy as planning for the creation, delivery, and governance of useful, usable, and desirable content. So we see a lot of elements here. Content needs to be created, it needs to be delivered on the web, and then there needs to be some sort of plan for where it's going to go, how long it's going to be there. So there's a lot of elements here. I showed this slide last week. Content strategy can definitely help combat this junk drawer syndrome. One way you can do that, and this is a really fantastic tool, and if there are any catalogers listening right now, you'll love this. You can conduct a content audit to start wrangling what is going on with the content on your site. In a content audit, you are essentially cataloging your website. There are two parts to a content audit, and this it's a little bit hard to see on this screen here, but the left-hand columns are more quantitative in nature, where you assign a page ID to a page, you list the URL, and then there are some qualitative aspects to the content audit as well, where you assess different parts, different aspects of each page. Once you have a huge spreadsheet with all of your pieces of content on here, you can do some really nifty things assessing what is going on. So the qualitative aspect, I encourage you to assess these things. Is this piece of content accurate? Is this piece of content useful? And I often split, when I do content audit, I often split usefulness into two categories. Is it useful for the library to have on the site? Is it useful for our library patrons to have on the site? Is this content being used? Is this content appropriately web written? Is it on message with other branding considerations? When was it last updated? If you go through page by page and assess all of these different aspects of the content on your site, you will know a lot about your content. You might be saying, whoa, this seems crazy, this seems like a lot of work. Yeah, it can be, especially if you have a really big site. So if you are going to do a content audit, you might want to go through and reduce as much as you can before you do the content audit, and it'll be less work overall. And the results, although a lot of work, can be really useful on two different levels. First level is sort of an advocacy level. If you do a content audit and you have a huge spreadsheet, you can take that to stakeholders and administrators and say, yo, check this out. We have a lot of content on this site. Our website is very complicated. We need to devote some staff time or funds to getting a handle on this because we need to be doing a better job, right? So that's kind of one way in which content audit is useful, and then you actually can learn a lot in the process as well. And through sorting different columns on your big spreadsheet, you can come up with a little bit of an action plan for what you need to improve on your site immediately. So you can sort your columns. By the way, for each one of these aspects, I advocate for using a very easy to use, very coarse scale. So I prefer 0, 1, and 2 for assessing all of these things. And you can come up with a scale for doing this. So 0 would be this page has, some serious inaccuracies. 1 would be this page is mostly right, and 2 would be this page has no problems. Same, for instance, with web written. So 0, this page, needs a complete overhaul. 1, this page needs, some minor adjustments. 2, this page is totally written for the web. If you do any more granular of a scale, things just get a little bit meaningless. But at any rate, so if you go through and you assign figures and values to all these different things, you can sort columns and see, okay, here are all the pages on our site that have some pretty big problems with writing. And then if you do a more fancy sort and sort, say, by web writing and by use, if you have your analytics data in there, you can see, okay, here are the pages that are getting used the most that are not written for the web. So why don't we go ahead and rewrite these, because a lot of people are looking at these pages every day, and so forth. Really great tool for coming up with an action plan and also seeing the strengths and weaknesses of your site's content. If you have more questions about content audits, I will be happy to talk about those during the Q&A. Also, I can point you to some resources on the web and a book that can help you as well. So in addition to doing a content audit, an important part of doing a content strategy is coming up with a workflow. This is going to look different for every single library, but mapping out who is going to be doing the requesting, creating, editing, approving, publishing, all these different content functions, mapping that out and just laying it out of how it works at your library can help with some of those territorial issues, and it can help get a nice process in place. So some libraries are going to have multiple content requesters, multiple content creators, and so forth. Some libraries might have one person doing all of these roles only. It's definitely contextual, but again, thinking about these roles and figuring out who in your library does them is a really important part of developing a strategy for having great content. Here are some other content related tasks too. So who does these things? Important in all of this, I think, is having some sort of content sheriff who understands what's going on with the website. Now, this can be tricky because no one wants a content dictator, right? Who just holds the keys to the kingdom and shoots down every new idea, or says yes to every new idea, I guess. That can be very unhelpful and very frustrating for everyone. But having a content sheriff who has an understanding of the library's goals for the website, has an understanding of what content is on the website, oversees this whole process, I think is really a great strategy. I mean, a newspaper would never happen without a pretty robust editorial staff. And if we have websites, I really do think we're in the publishing business, and we need to take that seriously. So having some sort of benevolent oversight, I think, is really key. So how that happens in your institution is definitely contextually dependent, but consider making that happen. So great resource for content strategy is this book, Content Strategy for the Web. It has a great overview of the whole process, talks a little bit about content audits, etc. Check it out. Okay. Kind of winding down here in the last remaining section, I want to talk about persona development and what personas are. This is related to content strategy and writing for the web because we need to know who our audience is if we're going to effectively craft content for them, right? So this persona development process is a form of user research that many of you can think about doing. So here is an important question. What do people want to do on our site? The answer to this question will drive a large portion of the design effort, right? Most important thing in this sentence is people. So how do we learn about people, and how do we know really what they want on a site? Now remember last week I mentioned doing the basics first and then getting fancy. The vast majority of people on a library website, they want to search for library items, they want to know when the library is open, where the library is, maybe they want to learn about library events. Those are the most important things. I would say that probably encompasses 90% of reasons people come to a library website. So this persona development is definitely higher level in that it's, I think, getting at the last mile type stuff of content that you're going to put on your site. And it can also be helpful for figuring out sort of the tone of your website, the style of your website. Knowing more about your audience and your community can help you to make those decisions as well. So this is a common way we think about people in, say, in a university setting, students and faculty, and that's fine. Here is a little bit more granular of a way to think about people, undergrads, faculty, and adjuncts. Here is a classic audience segmentation for a library website, kids, teens, and adults. I bet a lot of folks have this listed on their library website, and definitely understand the intention there, and it's a legitimate choice. However, people don't really come to the website thinking of themselves as kids, teens, or adults. People think of themselves more as someone in need of a book, someone who wants to be entertained, someone who wants to learn something. And getting at these higher level goals and motivations is something that personas can help us accomplish. So a classic way to start doing persona development is to talk to library users. User interviews are quite similar to reference interviews, something that most of us have experience with, in that you ask a bunch of open-ended questions, you listen to what people say, and in user interviews you record what people say about their behavior, what people say about their lives. The scope of the conversation in a user interview in a library setting definitely depends on what sort of end result you're wanting to get at, but I definitely advocate that libraries have a bunch of conversations, open-ended conversations with their community members just to learn about people's lives and keep it very general just to learn about the community in this way. Another way that you can get at this behavior is, and this is a less effective way I think, but you can do sort of a quick and dirty persona development process, and you just brainstorm what you know about people in the community. I think if you do this, it can be a good start. It's often good to verify with actual user interviews and research afterwards. But regardless, whether you are interviewing people or brainstorming common tasks on your own, you're going to group commonalities into unique groups, kind of lump tasks that go together. Then you assign names to those groups, and you end up with something like this. You assign demographic data to your personas, you put a picture, you give them a name, you make them as human as possible. So these personas are fictional representations of library users, of archetypal library users. So this is a university setting, these folks represent different types of people using the library. You can then design your website and other library services for these folks. So when you are thinking about implementing a new service or thinking about doing a redesign on your website, you can refer to these personas because they are representative of your library users and see if the decisions you're making are in line with what these people want and need. Again, you can find the most important things that these people need to do to use your library to be successful with it. You can then compare your website with these personas as well, and you can say, okay, well, you know, Sylvia there, she's going to use these pieces of content, and so is going to use these pieces of content. Oh, here we have some content that doesn't match up with any of our personas. We could probably 86 that, right? So personas can be a useful way to assess content as well. It's important that when you develop personas, you don't make them sort of aspirational, like what you want them to be doing. That's a common temptation, you know, like, so for a student persona, you're like, oh, he comes to the library and uses the reference collection after class. This may or may not be accurate. Remember, you're trying to describe these people, their lives, not necessarily even in relation to the library, but just getting at their wants and needs. So why do we want to do this? Well, it's going to be really useful for assessing content, like I just mentioned, and without knowing about people in our communities, we can't dig in deep and create interesting things for them. So analytics can be an important part of assessing content and seeing if your strategy is successful. And I think knowing who is looking, how many people are looking at what content can tell us what we can remove from our site, what we should be making better. That's important. But also task completion rates, I think, is a great way to assess your content. So this can be done through some usability testing, which I'll talk about next week. This is essentially asking people to accomplish certain tasks and watching them do it. This can be a good way to figure out if your content is effectively meeting the needs of people. Okay, so speaking of next week, tune in next week for more about making your website better and easier to use. We will dig into some user research methods. These things are definitely important. I think there is a lot you can dig into and do with web conventions and making your site better by aligning your site to web conventions, then rewriting the content and making it user-focused. Those are sort of first steps, and then for the last step, we've saved this higher-level user research stuff. I think usability testing is something that all of us should be doing as well on our library websites, so I'll tell you a little bit more how to do that next week. And with that, I think we have 5 minutes or so for questions.
So Aaron, I don't know if you see the first question from Jessica. What kind of questions should we be asking during the user interviews?
Okay, yeah, let me get the right screen here. Cool. Okay, cool. I still don't see those. Oh yeah, I do now. Yes, Jessica, great question. So again, I alluded to the fact that you can scope the interviews to sort of be on topic for what you want to learn about. For user interviews for persona development recently, I've done very general questions, and that's turned out pretty well. So best practice, if you really want to learn about people in a neutral, unbiased way, it's good to set these interviews up outside of the library. It also can be good to not even tell them that this stuff is library related, because as soon as there's a context in that way, people will sort of skew their answers. And remember, we want to get at people's actual behavior versus what they think you want to know, or what you think they want to hear. So, or what they think you want to hear. At any rate, so you can ask them questions about their work. You can ask them questions about their family, if that's appropriate. You can ask them questions about their entertainment habits. So talking generally around topics that are library related, like entertainment, learning, job searching, stuff like that can yield some pretty good results and help you learn about people in your community. And then There's also the issue in persona development. Well, should you talk to non-users as well as library users? And I think the answer is definitely yes. You want to get a broad perspective of the people in your community, so that can be useful too. Hopefully that helps. Lisbeth asks, we have info on our website, not used often, but useful. When looking for, say, library policies, should we keep on our site, or is this just clutter? Great idea. Great question. So library policies is an interesting one in that it's sort of a important library need to have those policies on there, right? Because library policies need to be available. You need to be able to point to them if it ever comes to that, right? These are things that are just it's just kind of a basic library need. So yeah, I mean, you can have policies on your library website and de-emphasize it, so it's pretty much out of the way from everything else, because chances are it's not a real hot ticket item for folks. I know I haven't spent too much time browsing library policies on library websites. So that's something that can be de-emphasized. For other semi-related things, especially if they're useful for librarians, I often recommend creating some sort of intranet. So if it's useful on occasion for library staff, take it off the main website. The main website is for library users. It's not for librarians and it's not for staff. Create another resource, an internal one, where folks can get that stuff there. Okay, so yeah, related question from Lisa, board minutes and agendas. Yeah, you know, you can have, I think, a fine place to squirrel that away if you have a section titled about, like about the library. You can kind of squirrel that stuff away in a sub-page there, and I think that is a fine way to go about things. Diane asks about generating a content audit and a content spreadsheet. Yeah, I generally like to do things by hand, do a content audit by hand. It can be tedious, there's no doubt about it, but I think it's important to capture everything. There are some tools to help you generate at least the quantitative portion. Some CMSs have plugins where you can kind of spit out a spreadsheet of a sitemap, and that can help. There's also a tool called, I don't really know why it's called this, but it's called Screaming Frog. Yeah, so you can search for Screaming Frog, and you'll probably get some interesting photos on the web, and hopefully you can also find this tool. There's another tool that I've used on occasion for Macs. It's for OS X only. There's no PC version. It's called iGooMap, IGOOMAP, and that can help as well. And Vicky, would you please clarify your question for me about recommend a web building site?
While we wait for that, Aaron, maybe if you see Ashley's question, how do you manage what stat or what site pages are being used the most?
Good question. There was a really robust analytics tool, open source tool called Urchin. It got snatched up by Google. They turned it into Google Analytics. It's free. You paste in a little bit of code into your website, and then there's a whole super robust backend for assessing data. So Google Analytics I could recommend. If you happen to use any CMS, there are often stat packages built in there. WordPress has a great plugin called Jetpack, which has a useful site stats plugin. Yes, okay, so it's getting started. I see your question, Vicky. Yeah, you know, I really like WordPress as a tool for getting started, for making web pages. Pretty low barrier to entry. You there's a lot of different templates available. Installing and hosting WordPress can get a little bit more complicated, but I think there are plenty of resources about how to do that. Weebly I'm not so familiar with. I don't know if it's quite as robust as some others, but I think getting started with WordPress is a nice strategy. At least I've never heard of ModX. I have not.
Okay, well, I think with that, it is 12 o'clock. So again, just like last week, a lot of good information for us to think about, and we'll do this one more time next Wednesday for part 3, same time. And as I said at the outset, I will make this recording available on Friday at some point in that Continuing Education Archives page. Should you want to watch it again or want to share with your colleagues who maybe couldn't be here today. So, Aaron, thank you again, and we'll do this one more time on Wednesday of next week.
Okay, looking forward to it. Have a good week, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.